podcast is part of the 80s Ruled Network. Visit the 80s Ruled on Facebook for more 1980s awesomeness.
Welcome back to another episode of 1980s Now, a weekly examination of the importance of 1980s pop culture and its influence today. My name's Will, and joining me, as always, is my friend, singular, and co-host, singular, John. Hey, John.
I don't know how to say hello when a cat's not here. I always say hello after her. Hi, I guess.
Hi, guys.
We'll try. Hi. Oh, there. Hey, how's it going? See, that helped. Thank you.
Oh, I should have had her on the soundboard. Just played it. Yeah. In addition to hosting his own, in addition to co-hosting here, he also hosts his own podcast, Gen X Grown Up. John, that's John.
That's me. Hi.
Hey, Kat. Yeah, Kat's not going to be joining us today because she's seeing Duran Duran again, a second time, which is fine. I know. Look, you love concerts too. She loves concerts. I'm not a big fan of concerts.
I'm not judging her. I mean, I think I told you that one time I followed Alan Parsons around the country and went to 6 different venues over like a 5-day period. Yeah. And so I will not be judging Kat on her Duran Duran addiction. In fact, I will enable her and applaud her.
Yeah. Look, I love Kat. I adore Kat. I support Kat. But I do feel a little like, didn't you already commit to this podcast though that happens on this night? I mean,
well, yeah, but I mean, you're not Duran Duran either.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Oh. All right, I don't have no response to that. Nice. And I'll probably cut that comment out because I sound like an asshole.
Damn it, Kat. It's time for this show. Dial in from the concert. Go to the bathroom. Get on your phone.
That would be something. Then I would support it, yeah.
See?
I mean, I do support it. Didn't I cut that part out?
She's in the mosh pit. She's got her webcam on. Perfect.
Oh, yeah, she's got a helmet with a camera on it.
The GoPro. Is there a mosh pit at Duran Duran? Probably not.
No, probably.
Too many broken hips.
Not Kat, though. She's in great shape.
No. Yeah.
On today's show, we're going to determine what makes a 1980s period film or TV show authentic. And we're going to be joined by 2 filmmakers who are making a movie set in 1988. I'm talking about Christopher Smith and Rand Vossler. I realized I didn't write my bad puns.
Oh, how are we going to make it through the show without bad puns?
Oh, no. Yeah. So let's see. Let's try to just improvise it here. Okay. Hold on a second. Before that, we're going to review current news stories related to 1980s media, including, no, I got nothing for that one. Something about Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
So you usually write your teas ahead of time, right?
Oh yeah, because that's the only way. Look, they're awful puns usually, but
suddenly I'm like, is Will actually so clever? He comes up with these puns on the fly?
No, I'm just
okay.
I'm just well rehearsed. All right, hey, we're going to talk about news. There you go. Right there you go. You'll see. You can hear it in a minute. Just stick around. I feel like
surprise.
I think I just realized Kat's the glue. I just realized that.
Yeah, you and I are garbage. Come back, Kat. Please come back.
Come back. Hey, before we talk about 1980s news, because there is going to be some. There's probably notes or time codes in the notes too, if you want to skip to that.
Yes.
Wanted to make a brief announcement. This Tuesday, August 30th at 9 p.m. Eastern, you're going to please join us on Facebook for 1980s Trivia Live. We're going to ask a bunch of questions. And if you are the person who knows the answers to the most questions and actually does them faster. So if everyone gets the answers right, it goes to the fastest person. So there's no time to cheat and Google stuff. You can try. Maybe you're fast at Googling, but don't. You shouldn't do that. And this Tuesday, August 30th at 9 p.m. Eastern during 1980s Trivia, we're going to be joined by a special guest who is going to ask questions about movies she starred in the 1980s.
Who could it be now?
I keep feeling like I want to give clues about that, but should I just mention one movie?
You have to pick one movie that there are several potential celebrities in, so it doesn't give it away. Like, don't pick a single, like this is the primary vehicle for this talented.
All right, let me think here.
Individual.
All right, how about this one? Better Off Dead.
There you go. There's
a lot of people in that. A lot of men, a lot of women. I think I already said she a couple times, but that's fine. So you got it down to 50%. Anyway, join us.
$2.
Oh, and we're giving away $50. I forgot. If you win, you get $50.
So more than $2. 25 times $2.
Yes.
Nice.
I'm glad you did the math. Yeah. Yes.
It's only a story. It's not real. It's only a story.
Okay. So starting a couple of months ago, we put out the call to any folks who have a true 1980s tale. I thought at the time, aren't people just dying to get on the quote radio?
They're going to be beaten down the door, right? Of course. Everybody has, I know I have 80s stories. Why wouldn't everyone else?
That's what it is, I think. I think I'm just, my outlook is colored by the fact that I know so many nostalgia nerds like ourselves, and that's my friend group. So yeah, and we've all got tales, and
people willing to air that dirty laundry on said podcast. That's true. That's the other component that we might not have considered.
It's because they all have podcasts. Yeah.
Sorry, these stories are used up. Sorry, use it on our show.
When you were a kid in the 1980s, were you calling into radio stations to win contests, make requests, get on?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, you had the rapid dial thing where the radio station would be, 424-1234, and I would dial 424-123, and then you wait. Right. And then you wait. Be the third caller now, 4. Then you hit that button. So I'm already 6 numbers ahead of the schmoes that didn't do that. Turns out everybody was doing that, I found out.
Yeah. All you need is one other guy to be doing it.
And my plan's wrecked.
So yeah, I don't get it. But we didn't hear from a whole lot of people. And in fact, I guess we heard from the one. Because he joined us. And I'm talking about Rudy Childs, who told us this crazy story about, you got to listen to the episode. He's got a book coming out. I'll put the link in the description.
He's breaking in and out of venues and getting caught by security and a human battering ram. It was quite a story.
Anyway, so look, if you have a story you want to share on air, write us, will@1980snow.com. But we have another taker. And so Tony Great has reached out with a story to tell. I guess I'll say for now, and then I'll tell the truth in just a moment. All right. Anyway, so let's get Tony on the phone here.
Okay.
Hello,
Tony. Hey, Tony, it's Will.
Hey, Will. How are you?
I should say at 1980s now. Maybe you know a lot of Wills. I don't know. That would be.
Well, I do know a few Wills, but your voice is pretty recognizable.
Oh, okay. Thank you. But you know a lot more Tonys.
I do know a lot of Tonys.
Okay. So Tony, we were just talking on the show how we want folks to share real 1980s true stories with us. And as often as folks reach out to us, we want to be able to share them. So we're grateful that we hear that you have a story of some aspect of your life from the 1980s that you're willing to share.
In the 80s, I was from age 6 to 16.
Okay.
So, pretty formative years, a lot of events in there that are pretty core to who I am. So this one in particular was a story. Basically, at some point, my parents, marriage was falling apart, and of course, kids that have to deal with that. If there's not a good support system there for them, then you're going to find outlets for some outlet to escape that.
Sure.
For me, it was Masters of the Universe.
One of my favorites.
Which was huge childhood influence on a lot of things. My art, I was big into drawing. My TV watching, obviously, every time I came home from school, Masters of the Universe was on the screen, no matter what. And my toys that I collected and played with and acted out my own stories.
Of course.
So that was a nice escape. And so several years, go by, and after everything happens with my parents, and life moves on. At some point, I think in the early 2000s, I'm on the internet, still fairly new, the internet in 2002, 2003, and go to xentertainment.com, which is not a porn site.
I thought this was taking a turn, a weird turn.
Yeah, not a porn site. It was a pop culture site run by a fellow named Matt. He now runs Dinosaur Dracula. That's his.
Oh, okay, sure.
But at that time, he had made a post about something that was also big in my childhood, and that was create a character contest. For Mattel had held this nationwide create a character contest, and kids from all over would send in their designs. Hopefully they win, and their figure gets turned in, or their design gets turned into a figure.
Right.
And then even maybe beyond that, and you would win a college scholarship, and then president for a day at Mattel, which
Wow.
basically just an honor. I'm sure you had no powers whatsoever.
I'm shutting it down.
Yeah. Let's shut this whole division down. You're all fired.
Barbie's done.
Yeah, we're doing away with Barbie. So yeah, there was a kid that did win. It wasn't me. I was really upset. I still to this day, I understand because my design was terrible.
Oh.
But, as a side note, it just consisted of kind of like an offshoot of Shockwave's head placed on like a Zodak body.
Okay.
That was and so I took that as inspiration for this design. And, but as a kid, I'm like, how could this not win?
Yeah.
So they did not win. Another kid did. Later on, I see this post on X Entertainment about the winning design, which was Fearless Photog. And so this character, which at that point I was totally disgusted with, I was like, I don't understand. This is so stupid. He's got a camera for a head. He's got these strange powers where he can take a picture of someone and drain their powers. I don't know. It was bizarre. But so I'm reading this article. A lot of stuff I already knew. But then the people, the members of the website, didn't want to go that direction with it. They wanted to find out whatever happened to Nathan Bittner, the kid that designed this.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, right. No, but whatever happened to that kid? So they took it upon themselves to start like doing a deep dive into the internet. It's still fairly early internet, so the fact that you could dig up all this information on somebody so quickly was kind of like it caught you out of nowhere. And I'm sure a lot of it was, not accurate, not truthful.
Right.
But even so, there was a lot of details brought to light about this kid as he went through life. And there were some pretty interesting little tidbits in there at one point. Like, again, true or false, who knows? He's working for Bungie, helping to design Cortana for Halo. Could be true. I don't know. And also, he moves on and starts his own gaming company to develop games. That fails. He gets unromantically involved with a prostitute named Gemini. Has maybe some substance issues. Goes into the military, gets a degree. I mean, just all kind of stuff that, again, probably not true.
Allegedly.
Yeah, these are all alleged things.
Yes.
Anyways, it made me realize after reading that, all these 2,300 plus comments from all these people digging up every little thing they could find, that maybe I shouldn't have been so harsh to be like, this kid is my enemy,
Yeah.
How dare he steal this win from me during, peak childhood years. And so I started to grow to appreciate that character. So much so that when Mattel finally did, go through with their promise of having the character made into an actual action figure, because they did not do that in the 80s.
Okay.
The line failed before they could actually get.
Which line was it? What was it supposed to be for?
This was for the original line in the mid 80s.
For Masters of the Universe?
Right.
Okay.
The original Masters of the Universe line. Now, they did create the character as an action figure for the Masters of the Universe Classics line. It was an online-only line where you kind of subscribed. It was kind of an early version of a lot of the pre-orders for toys that you see nowadays.
Gotcha.
They had to make sure that they had enough interest to warrant manufacturing something, so you had to pre-buy it.
And when they finally did it?
It would have been almost 30 years later.
Oh, wow.
So when they did finally create the figure, I bought 10 of them.
Oh.
Like, it just kind of meant something to me,
No kidding.
And so all of that is what was the core of what inspired the writing of the story.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. Let's, so yeah, look, I'm not trying to pull a trick here or pull a wool over our listeners' eyes. We're talking to Tony Great here, who also happens to be co-author of Tommy and the Order of Cosmic Champions. You catch me looking at the cover because I want to make sure I get all the words right.
I've got one here too if you need it.
Yeah. So I can now, hearing that story, I can see the direct connection to obviously the story that happens in the book here.
Now, obviously, I did not run away and have an adventure.
The crazy adventure.
Yeah.
No.
And I wasn't debating whether or not I was crazy or actually being visited by characters out and all of that.
Spoilers! Too many spoilers.
Yeah, we're giving it all away right here on this show exclusively.
Yeah. So, folks should definitely check out Tommy. I'll abbreviate here, Tommy. When is it out? It's not out yet, though, officially, is it?
No, it'll be released on October 18th.
Very good. Yeah. And I know you can pre-order it, of course, everywhere. You can talk about pre-orders. You can pre-order it everywhere.
Yeah, right.
And Tony was kind enough to share with us copies in advance. And as I mentioned on the show before, because Tony and his partner Tony were kind enough to sponsor one of our 1980s trivia not too long ago. It's a great book. It's well written. It hits on so many things that there'll be moments in this book where you'll go, oh, I forgot I used to do that, or that kind of thing, or I can relate to that. So many things. There
were a lot of references. We try to get more obscure with some of the references for the real hardcore nostalgia nerds, now that I don't remember that. What's that? And this would be something that only the really, the really well-versed people in the 80s would pick up on, fruit and cream Twinkies. They didn't last very long.
Right. And the rest of folks are Googling. Come on, was that really a thing?
Yeah,
exactly. Sure enough. Tony, thank you so much for sharing your true story of the True Tale of the 1980s with us. And folks, we're going to remind them again, and when it comes out, of course, to get their copy of Tommy and the Order of the Cosmic Champions by Tony Great and Tony Rapino. It's available for pre-order right now.
Thank you for having me.
If I was that kid, look, Tony said Tony didn't win. But that a kid who did win that he told us about, I'd be so upset if it never came out. I guess I should say. Yeah,
I probably, Tony was better off because he didn't win and didn't get the prize. Yeah. That poor kid won and they didn't follow through on the prize. Well, eventually, but not when he was a kid, not when it mattered, not when he could have went neener back at school, right? Yeah, he missed out on the gloating.
All right. Hey, John, just you and just, oh, jeez. Good Lord. Let's get caught up on 1980s news.
Let's do it.
All right. Hey, this week on 1980s news, per Deadline, Ferris Bueller's Day Off is getting a spinoff. Spinoff Ferris Bueller. Now, see, now I'm trying to think about a pun I could have made. Ferris Bueller's spinoff. I don't know. Look, I think about them and write them ahead of time. All right. The Emmy-nominated creators of the Netflix hit series Cobra Kai are producing a spinoff of the 1986 John Hughes film.
Yep.
It's going to be called Sam and Victor's Day Off. And if you have no idea who they are, because I didn't, it's because the characters that are getting a spinoff didn't have names in the original film.
No, they're memorable, but they weren't named.
Yeah. And we're talking about the two valets who parked Cameron's dad's car. I'll say parked. They did more than that.
Well, they eventually parked it.
Yes. As far as we know. I mean, did they pull in right? I'm trying to remember in the movie now. If they pulled in right when the three...
I think they pulled in just in time for them to pick up the car. I think they were gone. Yeah. I think so. That's how I remember it.
So if you remember, a pivotal plot point in Ferris Bueller's Day Off is how Ferris talks Cameron into letting them borrow his father's rare 1961 Ferrari 250 GT. Mm-hmm. Of course, so Cameron points out that, it's his father. It's his love. It's his passion. I think he says something about he loves the car more than me.
Yep. Fine. I'll go. Shit. I'll go.
And finally, when they use the car to have their adventure, they leave it in a parking garage. And wouldn't you know it, my fear, this is always my fear. I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey. So I often went to New York, oftentimes took public transportation. But when I drove in, I did fear, and maybe only for seeing Ferris, that something would happen. Not like I didn't have a rare collectible car, but something would happen to my car. Even if it was just banging it up in the parking garage. I can only imagine Cameron's fears being realized here.
Yeah. Well, at that point, the Band-Aid was ripped off. He had borrowed the car.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't want it wrecked, which they didn't do. But apparently, they had a grand old time, and we're going to get to see the parallel. It's the same day. I'm guessing the movie's going to start from when they get the car to when they drop it off. That's if I'm making the movie, and these are the Cobra Kai guys, so I got to think they're looking at the material from a mindset of us, people like us who love Ferris Bueller. Like, if you're those people, if you're us, what do you want to see? Just slot it in. Just show them picking up the car, have our movie, and end it. Closing credits, giving it back to Ferris. That's what I want. That's what I hope happens.
Last week you talked about how we're getting all these reboots and sequels and remakes of 80s stuff that we love. So when I read this headline, I was like, no, go away. But only after reading that, you're right, John, because we got John Hurwitz, Hayden Schlossberg, and Josh Held producing it, the Cobra Kai guys. And I'd learned that Bill, and this is going to be a movie. It's not going to be a TV series. Bill Posley is going to write it. And I didn't have any idea who Bill was. I'm sorry, Bill. But it turns out that he was the executive story producer of Cobra Kai's 4th season, which I loved. So come on. All guys that seem to love the things that we grew up with.
And I think this is a good way to treat material like that. Don't remake Ferris Bueller. Don't reimagine Ferris Bueller. Okay, if you want to continue it, we've talked about that's better. But this is it. This is almost like a Back to the Future thing. Like I get to see what's going on.
Oh, yeah.
Like show me the dance floor of the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. Like I just get to see more of the movie that I already love. Yeah. But they're not wrecking the movie because it's a part of the movie we didn't get to see. So it's kind of expanding that little universe a little bit without actually changing or damaging it in any way. Because right now you can imagine what they did. They're going to show us. That's cool. Yeah. That's fun.
And the story's going sideways instead of forward. Right. It's parallel. It's
it's a neat idea.
I wonder if it'll be weird because obviously we're going to have different actors play these characters. Originally, they were in the film. They were portrayed by Richard Edson and Larry Flash Jenkins, who passed away some years ago. But even if they were still around, maybe, but for having a cameo in there, we need folks that are looking like the age of these characters in 1986.
Yep.
Will that be weird as far as the continuity? Maybe it doesn't. I guess it doesn't matter. Maybe.
Well, I would hazard to guess that the majority of people couldn't pick those guys out of a lineup. Right. They're not big time celebrities. They were on screen for a very short time. Yeah. And it's not like recasting a major celebrity. So I'm sure they're going to cast someone that looks similar enough, that's talented and to do it justice. And I think we'll be fine with that. It's not, we're not going to say, let's recast Ferris Bueller. Right. No, they're probably they'll have some deep fake stuff or some creative shots probably around the start and the beginning. I can imagine you gotta have some cool different angles. Which is exactly that Back to the Future kind of like, he's in the rafters this time, a different angle that we never saw that they had to fake. So that could be fun. Again, I'm on board.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
And I checked in with Kat before the show. She's also on board.
Oh, yes, she's allowed to do that. Checking in. You can just be here, Kat, instead. All right, that's fine. Whatever. Now, so, when I heard about this movie, and as we know, so we see them leave. We see this iconic scene of them sort of jumping over. They're just coming off the highway or the road so fast their car leaps in the air. You've got the Star Wars theme playing when this slow motion. The car, is going to be completely wrecked when it lands. Of course, it's a film, so it's not.
Right.
But it turns out, and then, of course, when the kids ultimately get the car, they realize... First, Ferris realizes, holy shit, there's a lot more miles on the car than when and he asks Cameron, how many miles were on it? Well, it turns out I watched that scene and did the math. Okay. The valets put around 175 miles on the car.
Holy crap. So they only had the car for a couple of hours.
Yeah. Maybe they cannot.
This is going to be like Ferris Bueller speed. Like we can't go below 80 miles an hour. We got to maintain speed because we got to clock 175 in 2 hours. Damn.
It does seem like everything that they do has to be while the car is moving. Yeah. And maybe it turns into a cannonball run. They enter like a Grand Prix or like a race of some kind. Oh, wouldn't that be something? They win a race and then they bring the car back.
What if they just join the cannonball run and he's right there with everybody? Merge the two movies, put them together.
Deep fake all those people too. Yeah.
Yep.
I think we
Captain
come up with
Chaos. Run him over.
Well, yeah, and he can have a mask on him, so we don't even know who he is.
That's right.
I think we come up with better ideas than Hollywood often by,
Just call us. We will help you out.
Put him in the writing room. It's sort of in the film. It turns out, what Cameron says is something like there was less than 100 of these cars made. It turns out that in fact there were only 56 in the world. There were only 56 1961 Ferrari 250 GTs ever made, and because they were so rare, they couldn't use a real one because it literally would have cost them millions of dollars to own and ultimately destroy. A couple of these things. So John Hughes came across a replica of the 61 Ferrari in GT magazine. The replica was actually called the GT Spider California, and that's what they used in the film.
I see.
I'm telling you way more about Ferris Bueller. This is turning into a Ferris Bueller episode.
That's okay. That's nothing wrong with that.
I thought this was interesting too, because you remember Cameron's convinced that they'll be okay, right? I think because they have a way of dealing with the miles they put on the car.
Like he's never, ever dealt with a speedometer or an odometer before.
Well, yeah, except it turns out that the car, had it really been a 1961 Ferrari, the odometer would have gone down when driven in reverse.
Would it really?
Apparently that was a system that wasn't invented until the 1970s.
Holy moly. I just got educated.
Hey, speaking of John Hughes, another 1980s news and as reported by The Consequence of Sound, there is a John Hughes movie soundtrack box set coming. And I got to tell you, I've got mixed feelings about this.
Me too. Very
excited about having all these songs sort of, curated and in one place. I don't know what I do with a box set. I mean,
Exactly. I'm glad you said that, because when I read this, I'm thinking, who is this for? Like, there's no new music on it. I mean, maybe there's versions of incidental, but when I looked at the track list, I saw all the pop songs that I recognized. It wasn't like, someone's theme that you never heard that was off the soundtrack that never got released. It's all the great songs off these films. Yeah. And it just looks like a great 80s playlist. That's all it looks like. Now, yes, it's got some red vinyl editions coming out, and it's got I think one of the editions has like a 7-inch vinyl and a cassette, and releasing it, great. It's a collector's item. We have these songs. We have all these songs already. You either own them already on CD, or you own them on vinyl, or you're listening to them on Spotify, or you downloaded them for illegally off the internet. We have this music. Not me. Somebody might have. Somebody I'm saying, not me. But yeah, I looked at it, I'm like, that's awesome. I'm not going to buy one. I like that it exists. I like that we live in an era that's looking at our pop culture and seeing that it is marketable enough that they could do something like this and make money. But it's not something you buy to listen to. It's something you buy to go, I have it. And then you listen to the music other ways.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And it sounds really cool. Like you said, I would like to own it, but I probably just even to have it maybe, but the expense I'm sure probably would preclude just having it as a novelty item. There's a number of versions, as you mentioned. There's going to be you can get it in 4 CDs that comes with a bonus 7-inch and a cassette.
Yep.
You can get 6 LPs that are red. Or and those, there's I think there's 6 LPs, 73 tracks across 6 LPs, or there's a 25 track version you can get that's 2 records. And some of them, depending on which version you get, says some, sort of a limited edition type of material. I always thought it was odd that says all the versions include Simply Mine's Don't You Forget About Me. Well, yeah, wouldn't it? I mean,
of course.
I thought this was interesting. The music supervisor for John Hughes' films, a gentleman named Tarquin Gotch, which sounds like a John Hughes character.
Wow. Yeah.
Now that I think about it.
Is he real? Is that a pseudonym?
Yeah. What is it spelled backwards? John Hughes.
Oh my goodness.
He says that back when we were working on these movie soundtracks, the best way to send music around the world was with cassette by FedEx. We sent John cassettes of newly released music of demos of just finished mixes. And in return, he would send us VHS videos of the scenes that needed the music. Such an inefficient process, but it's, I don't know, something I really dig about it. Just this, how analog it is.
Something nice and gritty. It's just, it's a little inefficient, as you said. It's a little inexact. It's a little, and you kind of, if you reject everything you got, you got to wait for a whole nother cycle. So there was probably some bargaining. Well, that's not exactly the right song, but it's close enough. And we're, running late on time. We can't do another through the mails cycle. I'm sure that changed the soundtrack in ways that we'll never know, just because it was a limited method of getting that material around between the creators.
Yeah, right. Probably because, in the very least, if something better or new, that a suggestion that Tarquin Gotch was going to make, by the time John got something else that Gotch had already disregarded, maybe he'd settle on that, right?
Oh, he's probably already in love with that one. It's like, oh, this is a perfect song now. I've heard it 50 times.
Put it in. Yeah. It just reminds me of when I was doing sound design for theater in New York in the 1990s, everything would be on cassette, and they were starting to have, we had CDs back then, but theaters didn't have CDs. Then some theaters started getting mini discs, which were like little CDs inside of, plastic cases.
Yeah, little Sony mini disc. They were almost, they were random access. I think they were magnetic, but it was kind of still, I think it was magnetic tape inside of it in that disc format. I remember the mini disc and that that didn't stick around very long. No. I had to buy one to be able to, work in the theater. And it's like, I did 2 shows and everybody else was like, what is that thing? Yeah. They were cool, but nobody adopted them.
But it was so slow because if the director was like, hey, I want to change this sound, or can you do this? Yes. When I go back home and rewrite it, re-record it, bring it back tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, I can only
he does the John Hughes. Fine. We'll just stick with this one.
Yes. Right. It's garbage.
Good enough.
All right. Hey, another 1980s news. Per the Hollywood Reporter, Fast Times at Ridgemount High was deemed pornography by the studio execs. And you know what I say to that? Yes, I agree.
You agree?
Yes, that's how I used it when I was in 1982.
All right. Well, yeah, if you're 14, okay. When I read this, I'm like, is deemed pornography. And in my mind, I put ... by someone who's never seen actual pornography.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
it was a little salacious. It was somewhat tittillating. Yes. It was not pornography.
You're right. Yes, it was not nearly as graphic as It wasn't even as graphic as 1980s pornography.
So,
actually
wait, Will, what do you mean you used it like pornography? I don't understand. Can you explain that to me?
It's weird how since even though Kat's not here, I'm still censoring myself. There's so many times when Kat's around, I'm trying to
Well, she's going to hear it though. I mean, so you can, just say what you'd say around her. It's fine.
Yes, of course. I think we talked about this.
You've dodged the question.
Oh, no, I'm answering your question.
Okay, all right.
I think we talked about this before as being one of these films that has, one of the most paused moments in 1980s movie. Of course. And paused so you could, leer at a nude or semi-nude woman.
Right.
When this film actually came out, I was too young probably to fully appreciate it. Mm-hmm. But there was still some kind of spark.
Sure.
That went off.
Well, and it's shot in it feels like a dream sequence. It's super surreal. It's super idealized, and it's. They mentioned that in Stranger Things 4. They're riding in the car, and he's talking about. Well, they paused fast time at exactly this time code.
Right.
Who pauses it at exactly this time code? Boobies. Right.
Right. Yes.
Stop
he's like,
saying
it's
that word.
It's a thing we both like.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So this year, the film celebrated its 40th anniversary. And so just this past month, we got some new interviews with folks, including with Judge Reinhold, who said that, quote, we were really heartsick because somebody high up said, this is pornography and there's no way Universal is going to release this movie. Reinhold, however, countered saying that we didn't see it as this horny high school movie at all. We saw it as having the opportunity to do something authentic that was based on the actual experiences of the kids that Cameron chronicled for the whole year, end quote. If folks don't know, this is based on a book that Cameron Crowe wrote based on his experience 21 Jump Streeting a high school, when he was younger, to write a book. He pretended to be a kid at a school and wrote a book based on what he observed.
For a whole year. Yeah, I think I read. He stayed for a whole year. Yeah.
And he was 45 at the time.
All right. He was a senior.
Yeah.
I had to go back. It's been a while since I watched Fast Times, but I'm remembering, I think when they categorize this as pornography, I mean, maybe they're just talking about being very upfront about sexual discussions and content. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about abortion. There's discussion about losing your virginity. There's a lot of stuff in there that it wasn't Donald Duck cartoons. I mean, this was stuff that people like to pretend kids don't deal with, but kids do deal with it. And this film kind of brought it to the fore. And I think that's why it resonated with so many people, despite the fact that they gave it a crappy release and didn't promote it.
Yeah, and that's probably why, to your earlier point, that adults were, dismissing it as porn because they couldn't connect with it. Or, like many folks, and I don't know that I've done this with my own kids because we're pretty open, but there are topics that come up that you think, I wish my kid didn't have to be dealing with that. And pretend they're not.
There's plenty of time to deal with that later. Don't worry about that now. I wish,
My wife had the opposite approach. She's like, I'm going to tell our daughters like everything now. And she had a logic. She said, look, I want them to learn from me before some boy gets a hold of them and teaches them the wrong thing or uses the information as currency, of some kind.
I don't want you to learn it on the street.
Yeah. Got my kids working the street.
That's not what I said. That's not what I said.
Well, you're right. As you mentioned, even though it was in limited release and initially, and because, and not supported with advertising, because the studio felt this way, it was a hit. It landed on limited release on October 13th in 1982. And through word of mouth, mostly by the young folks who appreciated it, I'm sure, it cracked the year's top 30 at the domestic box office.
They said people kept coming back to the theater and they had memorized the dialogue like Star Wars nerds do today, right? Like Star Trek nerds do. They know every line. They were coming back again and again and again. And the studio had to go, well, maybe there's something to this pornography. It would put it out there.
I think, and I read, I wasn't thinking about it this way because, again, we were sort of, most of us discussed the Phoebe Cates scene, which is the most, I guess, is iconic. But Jennifer Jason Leigh is nude more often in the film. And more nude. I mean, she's completely naked in some scenes. And a lot of it follows sort of her, I guess, sexual awakening as a young person in the story. It got me thinking about the Phoebe Cates scene in particular was about how much gratuitous nudity, quote unquote, gratuitous nudity was in the 1980s. We could do a whole episode on it because I've read this interesting thing that I hadn't thought about. It was basically arguing that maybe there certainly we had gratuitous nudity, but you couldn't say it was gratuitous in Fast Times, I guess is what I was reading.
I had a buddy that when he asked for film reviews, he just said, do you get to see anything? Like he didn't care the quality of the film. He didn't care who was in it. He didn't care big explosions. Do you see anything? So I saw this movie. Tell me about it. Did you see anything?
Like, well, I saw car crashes and explosions.
You know what I mean, John.
We got Bush. But I think that this again, we could do a whole episode on gratuitous nudity in the 1980s and talk about films that whether they have it or not. Why? Because it'd be tittillating. And
talk about clickbait. Let's do it.
What kind of bait?
Click.
Oh, click. Clickbait. Yes,
bait.
Click. Right. Yes.
Enunciate.
But in Fast Times, the scene with Phoebe Cates, they argued, is not gratuitous because it's a fantasy, and young men fantasized about women being nude, when you're at that age. And the stuff with Jennifer Jason Leigh, it was in the context of her exploring her sexuality, her having sex with this, this other character. So it makes sense. There's plenty of other films that have gratuitous nudity, but this at least wasn't among them.
Like actual pornography.
Wait a second. Well, that's a whole philosophical question now. It can't be gratuitous if it's porn, right? Because it's necessary for the sake of having sex. Well, now you raise another question. This is just going down a bizarre rabbit hole. What if in pornography, they have sex, but they don't take off their clothes entirely? They just have, is this any of this getting in the show? They only have the areas necessary exposed. We can't even see them. We're just led to believe they're having sex. There's nothing gratuitous about the nudity now. I don't know what I'm asking.
I think then it's not pornography. Then it's just, then it's just PG-13.
That's my, all right. That's probably enough of that. Heckerling made this interesting comment that, I think it goes along with what you said is how different things are today, including the fact that filmmakers were more ready to talk about these things that were on the minds and hearts and happening to young people in the early 1980s. And, this film also reminds me of a film it was often compared with, which was Last American Virgin, which again dealt very openly. Now, that was more of a sexy romp at times, but it dealt with abortion. It dealt with, sex in a different way than Porky's and those kind of, really just body over the top films. Heckerling points out you probably couldn't get a film like this today because of the topics that it touches upon, and which is kind of sad because, and backwards, because it's important for parents to know about what's going on with their kids and for kids to know other people see them and understand these things.
Well, I think if that film was done today, though, it would be, it's interesting now that you mentioned that, to look at it through a lens today, that would be a much more politicized film. Whereas in Fast Times, it was really just looking at it through the eyes of these kids who are experiencing it and trying to figure it out on their own. And you do it today, and it's going to be, which side of the aisle do you fall on? Is how do you look at it? It'd be more politicized. Very different film. Yeah.
Right. You're right.
And we don't need all that politics in it. It's about the experience. It's about growing up is the part we need. Yeah. It would. Yeah. Don't remake this one. Quit it.
Yeah.
Don't do that one again.
Are there two characters in Fast Times we can have a spinoff that was happening?
Just something parallel.
Nick Cage's character or what's his name? There's so many good actors in this that, Eric Stoltz is in it.
Eric Stoltz, Forrest Whitaker.
What's his name from Nerds? The guys, Anthony Edwards.
Edwards, yeah.
Maybe those guys. All right. Hey, that was 1980s news.
Greetings, we're Technically a Conversation, a podcast for curious people by curious people.
Every week, we take turns presenting a new topic, and the other host has no idea what the topic will be.
We strive to educate in a way that's loose and fun. Our topics are all over the place, from light and funny to dark and sometimes spooky.
Some of the topics we've covered include urban legends, civil rights activists, vampires, pop culture icons, the supernatural and occult, spies and espionage, science and astronomy, and other weird and random things.
If any of these topics interest you, give our podcast a shot. Listen and subscribe at technicallyaconversation.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Parental advisory, we might use strong language.
Hey, if you like the show, please like, rate, review, subscribe. Do something to support it. Please, I'm begging you, for crying out loud. So John doesn't have to keep taking his top off.
Don't make Will beg. And
For
don't
money.
make me take my top off.
How many times can we do a sexy car wash to raise money for this show? No one wants to
all I
see.
can picture is Dodgeball, an underdog story.
Yeah.
When they had the car wash to
Yes,
raise
exactly.
money. Do you know that film? Horrible.
Yes.
That went horribly sideways for them. Get in there
Please.
deep.
Please, how many more can we do? All right. Hey,
Let's keep it at 0.
so look, at a moment, as I mentioned, we're going to be bringing out our guest, Chris and Rand, to talk about what makes a 1980s TV show, movie authentic, because these two guys are actually going to make one set in 1988. But I was curious. So in connection with this, I already been a fan of some of these shows, but some of them I rewatched, some I watched for the first time. For you, as a person who grew up in this era, is there any particular shows that you like set there that you feel that you connect with? And does any of it have to do with the fact that you lived in that generation, or maybe it doesn't really matter ultimately?
Well, it's probably a really easy one to grab just out of the top of my head, but who's done it best and most recently, I think, really is Stranger Things.
Yeah.
And the reason that I think they do it so well, or the reason it resonates with me, is they pick so many little genuine artifacts, or sometimes replicated artifacts, I guess, from that era. And it's not just, oh, look, they're playing Dungeons and Dragons and I had that monster manual. That's great.
Right.
But it's the stuff they're not even focusing on. I got retweeted by Atari the other day when I took a picture of a scene in Mike's bedroom where there was an Atari cartridge, Adventure was the cartridge, sitting on the desk behind in a scene. They didn't talk about it, they didn't focus on it, but you could recognize it at 1,000 paces if you know that. And it's just, they have that stuff back there to add the texture of, like, that could have been the bedroom of a friend of mine. That could have been the house of a friend of mine. You know, I think plenty of shows focus on, well, get the right model car, get the wood paneling, get the shag carpet.
Yeah.
But it's not about that. It's about all of the random paraphernalia that was strewn around a house. You know, you had the Werther's Originals in your grandmother's on your coffee table. You know, things like that that you didn't talk, right. You know what I mean? Yeah. You don't talk about those things, but they're part of the general consciousness. And when shows like Stranger Things has done, they tap into that and they find those little pieces of nostalgic touchstones, and they just put them around, and you don't focus on them, like I said, like that cartridge you didn't, but it seeps into your subconscious and you're like, this feels right. It feels right. They did a good job with that. I really can't wait to see them. I mean, they're wrapping up. They're going to have spinoffs. I don't know what era those are going to be in, but I like what the Duffer Brothers are doing with that. I think they do a bang up job.
I agree with everything you said. And in fact, when we get our guests on here, I want to point out some shows for me that don't work because they didn't pay attention to all those things. And they thought just having the car and the right shag carpet was enough. Yeah. And it didn't sell it for me. But a show that I had never seen, but only watched to talk about today that I really just am charmed with and feels so authentically 80s to me is Glow. The one about the gorgeous ladies of wrestling.
Ladies of wrestling, sure.
It had been recommended to me. I sort of, didn't think much of it. Wasn't interested in the ladies wrestling show when it was on, but I peeked at it just to see, how 80s authentic it was. And wow, sort of consistent with what you're saying. They just so thoroughly saturate the image, the foreground and background with things that just feel 80s, whether it's the color or the little, so the decor of a hotel or the look of the, all these things that for me sold it. And, and I feel like maybe I'm stepping on our guest's thunder here, but the music, so many little details, and maybe I'll say this when we talk to Chris and Rand, but so many little details, like you're saying, that I was trying to pay attention to them. But a normal viewer, and when I'm just watching these things like Stranger Things and just relax and not really focused on it, you get absorbed.
It just soaks into the fibers of the story. You don't have to focus on it. Don't make me go, they did a good job of the 80s there. Make me forget they were doing a job to try to make it look like the 80s. That's the difference. If it looks like you're trying, you did it wrong.
And I'll tell you, and consistent with that with Glow, look, I don't know that I would have been interested if it was a contemporary, maybe, because the storytelling's great, the characters, the actors are fantastic.
That's Mark Maron, right? He did the star of that?
Yeah, he's one of the lead characters, Allison Brie. But I watched a pilot of a bunch of these shows just to sort of get a vibe. I watched the whole first season before I even realized. Because I just got carried away. Yeah. All right. Hey, in a moment, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a whole lot more about this in greater detail with actual folks who need to worry about this because they're making a film set in the 1980s. When we come back in just a moment with our guests, Chris and Rand. It's our great pleasure to welcome two guests to the show today. Known for his collaboration with Quentin Tarantino, Rand Vossler was instrumental in the development of Reservoir Dogs, was responsible for early drafts and character creation for Natural Born Killers, and co-produced that film. Over the years, he's produced documentaries, written features, and in his spare time, directs web series and horror films. And joining Rand today, as a teen, Christopher Smith produced nationally syndicated radio programs. Since then, he's worked as a casting director and talent agent. And for the last 30 years, Chris has been a voice actor in cartoons, commercials, anime, and a fan favorite in video games. In his spare time, he was showrunner for the web series Toy Therapy, Your Childhood Has Issues. Together, these gentlemen are developing a film set in our favorite decade. Please welcome to the show, Christopher Smith and Rand Vossler. Hey, guys.
Hello.
So,
Good to see you.
we are so glad for you guys to be joining us because earlier on the show, we were talking about, John and I have been talking about not only what makes a 1980s show authentic, but for us, to what extent, I guess, that it makes us maybe drawn to a particular property, And so who better than to talk to two folks like yourselves who together you guys are making a film. Actually, these are things you're going to have to consider yourself as you make a film set in 1988.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you, before we talk about the different criteria of maybe the things you have to sort of consider, are you able to tell us a little bit about the film that you're making? No spoilers.
It is that a group of wannabe friends in Hollywood seduce a 70s teen idol to become friends and tight with them to get him to commit suicide to capitalize on his demise, basically. So it's a dark neo-goth or neo-noir dark comedy.
Hilarity ensues. Yeah, that's the last part of the tagline.
There's nothing funnier than coerced suicide.
No, it's a yuck fest.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm sure. Hey, look, I'm sure you don't want to give away too much about the film itself, but
I mean, ultimately, it is our kind of love letter to the 80s, really.
Okay.
Very much so.
We grew up in the 80s, our formative years in the 80s. And, it would be to our decade would be to, Lucas's American Graffiti is our kind of standard for a film of an era that really captures, all the cultural ambiance, basically.
Yeah, I guess that's a question I'd have for any filmmaker that makes anything set in the 1980s, unless it's specific. Like one of the shows that we could talk about in a little bit is The Americans, which is set in the 1980s, but it's pivotal that it's set in the 1980s. It's important because it deals with the Cold War and espionage of that era. So it makes sense. So is it just for the sake of nostalgia that you've chosen that decade? When I imagine that some of the response you may get from producers and potential backers is, isn't that going to be expensive? Can't we just do it now?
That's actually one of the things that's kept us from making the film
right.
That we do need, to do it right. We need, music, the art direction, props, wardrobe, everything, cars, vehicles. There's the things that pull you out of a film that's set in a period, and we really want to be authentic to the time period. So.
Gotcha.
And for the story to be credible, it needs to be sandwiched in between the time of 70s teen idols and then pre-internet.
I see.
Yeah.
So it can really only take place in the time that it does.
Right.
And we have gone back and forth on this project in particular to see if it can be done, as a contemporary film. And there are so many traps in that within our story that we just didn't want to give that up.
And we just enjoy it too much.
Yes.
But it's so much fun.
It's like candy. Going back and rereading the script on occasion, it's like, oh, this is fun.
I think it's maybe a bridge to talk about. So look, ultimately, I want to talk about the different sort of elements that make something seem like, and this could appear to any, I guess this could be the considerations to make any period film. Obviously, we're going to be talking about the 1980s, but talk about the different elements that may make one work, and succeed or maybe fail. But I'm just wondering, what is the goal, I suppose, when you're making, I think this is just sort of, maybe a threshold question. When you're making a film set in any period, let's say the 1980s, because that's what this podcast is about, is it almost to make it appear as if it's an 80s film, or is it merely enough that it's a story set in the 1980s, if that makes sense?
Sure. For me, there are plenty of films that have contemporary cinematography that are set as a period piece, and that's fine. It doesn't have to look like it was from the 80s necessarily. Mm-hmm. So, as far as, the technical aspects of what you can do with the camera versus the grain of the film, et cetera, I do appreciate films that do go that distance. I think Argo is one of the films that, you could look at Argo and imagine that being released at that time period.
And I think I'm probably one of the few people who crosses his arms and harumphs and stomps his feet if something is anachronistic.
Yeah.
And that's just me. Movies that are made today that are set in the 80s are set to appeal to a broad spectrum of audience members, and people who are younger than me who weren't there at the time and who really don't care that particular song came out 2 years after the movie is set. But for me, I stomp my feet and it takes me right out of the film.
Does it matter to you how anachronistic it is? How specific, how deep are you digging? You meant, is it a bad car? Is it I'm seeing an antenna on a house or something, or what kind of things kind of really grind your gears?
Music primarily. Mm-hmm. If there are music choices, especially pop music choices, that are used that were not of the era.
So it's blatantly incorrect.
Yes. And, yeah. or even mildly incorrect. I'll still pitch a fit.
Okay.
In an 80s film specifically, I don't mind if there's 70s music because we were listening to 70s music.
Exactly.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the famous ones that you don't, like I think it was Shane in the opening shot of Shane when he's coming, he's riding up the horse and, you don't notice this until you're looking at a 4K print or you're in the theater, there's like a grip truck driving along.
Oh, no way.
It's like,
I'm going to have to watch after that.
Yeah.
No, you can't unsee it once you see it.
It's like how now when you look at the high def transfers of the Incredible Hulk, you can see Lou Ferrigno had green booties on, but you couldn't see that on the TV back in the day.
Yeah. Like Mary Jane's,
It didn't matter. Yeah.
Right.
So look, we're getting into it here. So let's just get to our elements here. So what we're talking about is period music here, and I want to add to this. So, and look, we can refer to, if we can, let's refer to as many contemporary examples as we can to give some sort of examples here. And I have one for period music that's, I'm with you, Chris, on this. For music, for me, is a big thing. You know, I've always loved music. I did some work in music, so I listen. I'm always listening. And The Americans opens the film. The show takes place throughout the 1980s. I don't know if they ever specify. Maybe what songs are being played gives you clues. But if you remember,
doesn't it start just after Reagan is elected, or just after he's in office?
It's 1980, I think.
Okay,
80 or 81.
Yeah, I guess it starts in 81 and
after the inauguration.
Right, 81, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad to have you on and make sure that I'm wrong. Thank you guys. But anyway, aside from that, if you guys remember, it was kind of praised for the 2 minutes into the pilot, Fleetwood Mac's Tusk comes on, and it then is playing now throughout the remaining, I think, like 7 minutes of the first, what was it called? The first act in TV, I guess. I don't know. The first segment there before the first commercial break, it's just Tusk from then on. And look, Tusk is a great song. You know, it was sort of groundbreaking in a sense that you've got this rock group that used a marching band and live crowd sounds. It's a great tune. But you could tell it was a recrafted one. It was different instrumentation. It was, and that drove me crazy. You could almost be fooled at parts that it was really Fleetwood Mac, but it was too much and too different. And I was like, why? Just use the real song or score it with something else. Why recreate it? I'm definitely sucked out of the 1980s.
Do we know if it was recreated or if they just edited it to lengthen the musical portions? And because that happens all the time in film where they I couldn't find for sure, but because I'm a stickler for these kinds of things, like Chris was saying about music, I A-B'd them. So I listened to there's an extended version of Tusk that's 7 minutes long.
You go.
And I've done that kind of thing for shows before, Rand, like you're saying, extended real versions, I've done that. Right. And no, they re-recorded. It was a new guitar. The placement of the drums was in different parts of the stereo spectrum. There were different rhythm instruments used.
That's a remix, yeah.
And I was like, get out of here. It's your Tusk. I think The Americans is problematic for me in other ways, but we're talking about music here. Along those lines, what about score? When you're scoring something, Rand was making a comment about everything doesn't have to, the filmmaking process doesn't have to be the same with how an 80s film would be made. What are you guys thinking for your piece, or what for us makes something feel more 1980s with regard to the score?
I think music is one of the essentials. I think that's where most of the shows of that, that live in that world kind of hit. They spend the money, they get a few hits. They, in some cases, I think shows like Physical, they actually rewrote music to sound like Depeche Mode or sound like, nothing replaces like a full orchestral score. If somebody wants to do that in an 80s film, I'm absolutely fine. They're great composers who work throughout the 80s. It's not essential that music comes from that era, but yeah, like Chris was saying, I think it needs to predate or live in that world or be cinematic in some way. That
especially when it comes to source music, music of the time, music that's playing in, coming out of radios or even pop music that's just playing over a scene. I think it really needs to be of the time. And in terms of the score, I agree with Rand. I don't think it has to have an 80s score, but it's a really nice thing when it does. I was rewatching the pilot for Glow the other day. And the music for Glow feels like, with that alto sax, it feels like they lifted it right out of the soundtrack for Tequila Sunrise. It was immersive. I had a visceral experience with the scene and hearing that music. It was so well done.
That's my favorite for, yes. I think Physical is a little bit like this too, but Glow especially, it's a lot of it's just original scoring, but they're using instrumentation and instruments that would have been used most often in 1980s.
Absolutely.
Music, not necessarily scores, because you're right. There's a lot of 80s films still use orchestras, but plenty of them had just synths and guitars and saxes. Yeah.
Sure.
How about light? You guys know the terminology. I don't know the terminology. The lighting, the color grading, the filters. I mean, there's a certain, I know, and again, just looking at some contemporary ones, there's some for me that feels like 80s, and I made some notes maybe why, but is that something that you consider, and what makes something seem or feel more authentic?
Absolutely. I think that, that's from when I think of the 80s, I think of like, Tony Scott, his graduated filters, the sunset filters where the sky was dark brown, the sun is setting and stuff. Yeah. I mean, there's a look to the films in the 80s. Cinematographers who saturated their oranges and blues, and, against, E.T. is perfect example of that, where you have saturation of oranges and blues and contrasting scenes. I think Stranger Things does a great job kind of, it's from a cinematography standpoint and gapping lighting, the lighting standpoint, the pilot episode when the kids are riding down the street at night and you've got that crane with the bright backlight and the kid.
that Klieg light behind the tree.
Every film did a wet down. There's never an exterior scene without a wet down where there's water and you get the light on the ground. It's like, that's a very important, I think, for
smoke everywhere. There has to be smoke everywhere. I was just rewatching E.T. about 2 nights ago. Smoke everywhere. There's smoke in the house.
Yeah. And no one's smoking. It's not smoking.
No one's smoking. No, but as Dee Wallace is walking across the living room, it's like, why is there smoke in the house? Shouldn't someone be worried?
Yeah.
Drop and roll.
A diffusion that every DP. I worked in commercial music videos in the 80s, and I worked with, Russell Carpenter and people, like great cinematographers, and you're doing an AT&T commercial and you've got a mineral oil cracker in the house, and it's filling up, with this light. Oh yeah. At every window you have that shaft of light coming down. So
you mentioned the thing about the smoke, and it just occurred to me that I couldn't articulate necessarily why some of these shows seemed inauthentic to me. And I keep going back to The Americans. For me, that was one that really just it felt kind of half-assed in a lot of regards. The story is fine. I only watched the pilot, to be honest, but in addition to Tusk, I felt like I could see everything so clearly. And not only was it shot digitally, I'm sure. And there's a lot of problems I have with it. I feel like, again, the production design was, wear this wig. This is a jacket we found at the thrift store.
Right.
That's a car from the 70s.
Right.
We're good. And they didn't worry about anything else. I saw like siding on a building, and I'm like, that doesn't feel like that, how they'd have whatever. Yeah. But I could see everything so clearly. Now that you say that, maybe it's beyond digital. It's because there wasn't a haze or a...
No, and it's funny, specifically with The Americans, where I thought, story-wise, like you said, is like a great treatment. And really, I mean, from a cultural standpoint, it's very... I think that like the street scenes felt more like the French Connection, like in the 70s, without the grit and stuff. So, I mean, maybe without the smoke, the haze, the diffusion for the 80s look. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying about The Americans.
Yeah, well, I had the same reaction to the pilot of The Americans as you did. I kind of went, this is the 80s?
Yeah.
Really? And I went away from it for, probably a year, because it really wasn't that impressive to me. And then I came back and I went, okay, I'll give it another shot. And story-wise, it drew me in. I was able to put my pedantic nature aside.
Tone down your anti-80s Spidey sense that bothers you.
Exactly. It's hard to do, but I was successful.
So again, talking about another element that we touched upon now, I think, in the context of Americans, and John was mentioning this earlier when I was talking to him about what is his favorite contemporary show set in the 80s. production design, which I think, right, we're talking about we're talking about everything then, I think, at that point.
Yeah.
How far do you go? John was pointing out how he noticed an Atari 2600 cartridge in the background of a Stranger Things scene that's not referenced at all. They didn't have to put it there. Right. Because they did, there's some kind of thing that happens, and I didn't notice it, but I probably felt it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
How many layers deep do you need to go to sell a period?
The Duffer Brothers, obviously, that's very important for them. That attention to detail is very, very important. On the other hand, Rand and I have very good friends who were the prop department on Mixed-ish. And in anticipation of this show, I said, hey, guys, when you were doing Mixed-ish, how specific were you to the year that it was there or that it was taking place? Right. Just how important was that? And the response was, well, it was kind of 80s-ish. So they had some wiggle room.
Yeah.
The show took place in 1985, things from 1984 through 1987, as long as they sort of look right.
Do you think there's also a danger of going overboard and becoming a parody of the 80s? Like we just threw everything at the wall and it almost becomes like, an SNL sketch about the 80s. Let's put every goofy thing, everything we can find. There's a delicate line to walk between authentic and obnoxious.
Oh,
do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to be a heretic here and say that's my impression of The Wedding Singer, which is like one of the most beloved movies set in the 80s. Yes. And I watch it and it's just like they're throwing 80s spaghetti against the wall. And it's like, great. Yeah. Okay. Hey, it looks good. It sounds good. Yes. Another 80s song.
Enough.
But I never, it didn't draw me in.
And I have to say, I have not seen a lot of the Goldbergs, but that's kind of what I got from the Goldbergs as well. And I love their credit sequence and stuff. I mean, it's like it gets you in there and hits you hard, and you're like, I want to have fun with this. But it's like, it's a lot.
Yeah. And I wonder if, talking about maybe to John's point, it does seem like maybe in the Goldbergs, certainly, and in The Wedding Singer, since they're going towards more comedy and almost not a parody, but a broader sort of comedies, that they have more wiggle room to do that and probably care less about the authenticity and going for a style of it. So they're okay. Because the Goldbergs, it's funny you say that because it's a sitcom, it's so bright and colorful. Everything's so clear. There's not a single puff of smoke in the whole thing. So maybe there's a character smoking at some point. But I didn't mind it, I think, because in the reality of the show and the vibe of the show, it seemed to make sense.
Oh, absolutely.
And there were other things for me in that show that were so 80s, like the relationships of the characters and how it's written, that rang so true to me that I didn't even notice anything else, I mean.
No, the Goldbergs to me is it's just fun, and it's and I don't put high demands on it. It's just it's a good book.
Yeah. Going back to a previous topic, the Goldbergs is one of those projects that to me could take place at any time. It does not have to be set in the 80s. Okay. Maybe I haven't seen enough of it, and that's quite possible. But after watching a handful of the first season, that's what I came.
There might be a
with.
few plots that wouldn't work because, like you said, your project pre-internet, so you would have to artificially find a reason that you couldn't access the internet if you didn't set it in that period. But otherwise, I could see the Goldbergs is a family comedy. Really, it just happens to be It's just inundated, just drenched with 80s.
Well, and think part of the drenching for me in the Goldbergs, I'm losing the metaphor, whatever we're talking about, but is the wardrobe. And I also want to talk to you guys about the wardrobe, the hair. For me, a lot in the Goldbergs seems accurate. But again, it's a very colorful thing. So it's a sitcom. So everything, I think as far as the saturation or the color grading, I don't know the terms. You guys know. It seems like they're pushing it towards sitcom, which seems to be a little more along those lines. Whereas, and so I was more forgiving anyway, but a lot of the shows, some of the shows to me, and I'm trying to think of an example, had like they'd have the fluorescent colors and that sort of thing. But then it seemed to me And it seemed to me when they let them sort of just be more how they probably were on set, the less authentic it seemed to me. Whereas if they pushed the color grading in such a way that it muted them a little bit more, sort of washed them out,
Right.
I bought them as really being clothes and less like costumes, I guess, maybe.
Sure. I felt like American Horror Story 1984 was very costumey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was part of the fun. I mean, it was almost like they were doing an 80s send up.
Yeah.
Oh, is what it felt like.
84 is very much homage to the 80s slasher films, the Friday the 13th and the Halloweens. And you have the virginal character who's dressed with the ruffles, and you have
exactly. But you had the bright colors, the neons and the neon greens.
And speaking of costume, I learned watching American Horror Story, Glow, and Physical. I have a thing for spandex. I didn't realize it. Women in spandex. That's just amazing. How did I miss that in the 80s?
Yes, I remember that. It was glorious.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we had a drought for about 20 years, and then thank goodness yoga pants came back. So
is that right?
to save us.
Yeah. In muted colors, not the bright colors. It's almost like there's always smoke in the room now. Whenever you look at yoga pants.
Perfect.
Wardrobe and hair and makeup is another one of those things that can so easily get I think left by the wayside when people are creating the era. Probably wardrobe not so much, but hair and makeup. Because we just had different haircuts back then.
Yeah.
And if you see, you have your male lead and he's got a modern haircut. For me, it takes me out of it. For someone for whom that male lead is a contemporary, then that might be, I can relate to that person and this draws me in. But for me, it's...
Well, no, that makes me think of Deadly Class, which is, I guess, late 80s San Francisco.
Yeah.
But it's very contemporary. They do nothing really to make you feel like you live, apart from music and, a couple cars here and there, but very contemporary from a production standpoint, hairstyle. They kind of have a kid who's got kind of a mohawk thing going on.
Right. Yes.
But it is a very contemporary show. So, but yeah, shows like Physical, I think, and Glow specifically, really kind of hit that, the hairstyles and the variety of hairstyles. And really, I mean, there is a tale of two 80s. There's the early 80s, which is really late 70s stuff. And you still had mutton chops and, the big comb overs and long Sonny Bono hair. And then you've got the Jennifer Beals, full frizz hair.
Right.
Blowout.
Which is what I had.
Yes.
Did you?
Yeah, I had I looked great.
And we have the mullets with the ponytail. That's what I had.
I just sported the Horseshack all through junior high.
Yeah.
All right. Classic.
All right.
That's
I want
classic.
to see Chris's early headshots now.
Couple of things that I noticed. Back to Physical for a second. Rose Byrne's makeup is really good.
Yeah.
They don't go to the extremes, at least not in the early parts of the show where, she's got the colored eyeliner and things like that, but she's got the rouge on her cheeks that everybody had that made you look like you just got punched.
Both sides.
On both sides at once. Exactly. And there's a little film, an independent film from a few years back called Sin Street, which is an Irish film. And it takes place in 1985. And the main female character, backtracking for just a second, the look is a little bit nondescript until we meet our main female character, and her makeup and her hair is it's like stepping into the transporter. All of a sudden, boom, they just committed. Right here, they just committed. And then they committed by changed her makeup and her hair throughout, and they changed the hairstyle of our main male character. And very evocative, but really, really well done.
Now that's a great film, and great as he's introduced, his brother is introducing him to new musical styles to kind of hone his girl, and every album, it gives him a Cure album, and then he shows up and he's got the rough thing going on. So they did a really great job. Very, and very understated with their thing to it. It was just matter of fact as the film goes on, and very well done.
Yes.
How about, what are your thoughts about dialogue? Is it important to get, make sure you've got the lingo and jargon? Well, how the kids are talking in the 1980s, especially you guys you're dealing with a film where you got younger folks, right? I guess early 20s or something like that. What the hip language was. I mean,
yeah, there's the potential of going over the board if everything's,
pull a Goldberg, as we say,
right? The bitch in here or a gnarly bear is not that,
right.
Choice.
I said those words a lot. Conversation. So
you did. I remember.
Yes.
and I'm sure there are people who for whom this doesn't matter, but I can't stand anachronistic dialogue. Right. I can't stand phrases. It's like, oh, that didn't come about until 2007. Yeah. Don't say that.
Oh, sure.
Do you think of an example? What
there were a couple of, let's see, where was this?
He's got a list.
I did. I made notes.
He's a blog.
I made notes. There was going to be a quiz. I knew there was going to be a quiz.
Please,
well, in the pilot of the Goldbergs, someone says, "Don't poke the bear," and I'm eating my feelings.
Whoa. Okay. Oh.
Both phrases that could have been around, but are much more modern in their usage.
Wow.
So that took me out of that. Now I did not see this, but my son pointed out that in episode 3 of *Halt and Catch Fire*, one of the characters says, "Don't yuck my yum," which I looked up, and the earliest reference is 2003. Okay. So that to me was
yuck my yum.
Sloppy. And the last one is in the pilot of Physical, where someone says biatch.
Wow.
A biatch. Does it twice.
I don't remember that. Yeah,
remember that. Yeah,
that's party foul.
Yeah.
I'm guessing Rose Byrne was in spandex at that time, and I wasn't hearing things. I just heard the Charlie Brown teacher at that time.
You're right. Exactly. It's like, why am I paying attention to this surfer dude?
Yeah.
I don't want to be paying attention to this surfer dude.
So no on fleeks then in the film coming out. Okay. I still don't know what that means.
There are some who could
one or
use
two.
that. I'm sure. I just wouldn't fly for me.
I know Rand touched upon this, but I did, and I think because I disagree is why I'm bringing it up, or maybe sort of, making another point of it, about whether or not camera moves, technology available at the time a film was made in the 80s, if we rely on it maybe too much, or in a contemporary piece that's supposed to be set in the 80s, does that take you out? And I'll give you I can't give you a specific example. I thought I had made some better notes about this. I thought it was The Americans, but I went back and watched it. It's not. But there was some piece that I watched that clearly had a drone shot. And it might even been supposed to look like a oneer or something. And I was like, come on, they couldn't pull this off in the 80s. So it just took me out of it. And maybe because I knew we were going to talk, I was hyper focused on these kinds of things. But is there any consideration there when you're setting that you maybe think about more of how a film would be shot in the 80s, just so subconsciously we're feeling like it's,
Well, I mean, that ultimately depends on the film. If it's like immersive, you're in the 80s. I mean, there are plenty of films that take place in the 80s that don't make any effort to stylistically work. And I think like Conjuring 3 is a good example of a film that, is true to its formula in its own, horror thing, but it's like, this isn't the 80s. I mean, there's like a Firebird in one shot,
gratuitous Firebird.
Right. They pulled 3 props that were from the 80s. That'll do.
Yeah.
And they just reused them.
Yeah.
And that's a really good point, Will, is that, the drone shot is clearly a drone shot. And we, growing up in the sophistication, I want to see that crane shot that pops, at some point.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Or if it is that shot following the car down the road of the wooded highway, that, there's a helicopter doing
Yes,
that.
it's shaking, or you see the shadow on the ground, something.
No, exactly. Yeah.
Or it's a guy hanging on a truck or something that there's something intangible, isn't it? That a drone it's so smooth. Quit it. It's like there's not enough mist in the environment.
But I mean, from my experience and, going back to my production days where, working in the music video world and working with, amazing Academy Award winning talent people, they were always trying to make the impossible shot. They were always trying to do the shot that it's like how did you do that? Kind of thing. And that was always kind of pushing the technology and the gear back in those days to, come up with new things. And I think, the Steadicam was developed in the 70s, mid 70s, but it wasn't until like Wolfen in the early 80s that it's like, wow, this is like a shot inches off the ground with the wolf going through the thicket, and wow, mind-blowing stuff. And that it's practical, that it's something that was done on the set and not CG'd. Kudos to that, and there is something more authentic to that. And I actually worked with a special effects, Nick Brooks, who was one of the developers of Bullet Time with Matrix and Academy Award for What Dreams May Come. And he would always tell me that he always, to this day, tries to do as much of an effect practically before getting involved with the CG effects and stuff. That should be an enhancement of that. So,
yeah. Well, I guess thinking about your film, I wasn't thinking about talking about effects, but obviously there may be some if there's a suicide involved. No spoilers. But yeah, the fact you're right. I didn't even think about that. We appreciate so much as folks who grew up in the era that when we can feel like something was shot in camera. Oh my gosh, it's so rewarding.
How'd they do that? Well, now you just go, oh, wait, no, they put it in the computer.
No, of course. Yeah. Anything can be done. And it is, democratized creativity in a way that it's the only limit is your imagination from that standpoint. But, and likewise, looking back at films from that era, matte lines don't bother me. They don't take me out of the story. With the story, it's a good story. And those, the flaws of the technology of that era don't wreck a film for me at all. So
right.
You guys are polite gentlemen. John and I have talked about this before. You're right. It democratized it. The only limit is your imagination. But a lot of people's imaginations are garbage, and they shouldn't be creating stuff because it just creates a lot of chaff that now you got to sort through to get to the good stuff like our show.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. But that gives us a lot to talk about here.
Yes.
So see, there's an upside to that.
There we go.
The fact that everyone can make a film now doesn't mean everyone should.
Yes.
There we go.
Yes.
Right.
Just because we can, we don't stop to say, should we?
Yes. So often. Oh, God.
He just pulled a Goldblum on us. Way to go, Chris.
Oh, we got Goldberg's a void. Goldblum.
Right. Nice stuff. Good stuff. Yeah.
All right. Whatever. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a real one, and then I'll ask you this goofy one because I know we're getting a long time here. What about credits, title sequences, opening, closing? Look, among all the different shows that we watched and that we've talked about, some of them cared about this, some of them didn't care about this. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about that?
I love it when they care. Yeah. That opening sequence from the pilot episode of Glow.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, spectacular. You know exactly what you're in for.
Yeah.
That neon is just glorious. Mm-hmm. It's so well done. And in conjunction with the music. Yeah.
Well, I think back, credit sequences have varied throughout cinema history, and you think of like the Hitchcock films and the Saul Bass, these artful credit sequences, and it's all about setting expectations, creating a mood, creating a tone. There are films that have films and TV shows that have very basic or title shot, maybe without a sequence. But I think that, it's like with the Americans you brought up earlier. I love that credit sequence. It's not particularly style, but it like sets the palette, sets the table for this story. There was, I think even American Horror Story 1984 does a great job with it. And
even as short as it is, the title sequence for Pose is terrific. Because that pilot episode starts out with a title card that says, New York 1987, and it's not a particularly period font. But then when they get to, that short sequence where you just have the title and it just says Pose, and it's in neon, and then it pops and glitters everywhere. It's like, okay, yes, Yeah. All right. You got me. Take my money.
And I think Stranger Things is very basic, and it's, it's like you think of so many credit sequences, so many titles in the 80s were shot on animation stands, and they had the printed gels, animation cells with the backlight, and you can see the light glowing outside the edges of the
There's a little dust here and there. There's just
that was like almost every film back then, and it's like Stranger Things, very simple, but they nail that perfectly. So
and they did it practically. They did it in that right. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. I think what I'm learning is that the more, for me, beginning to end, that it seems like it could have been something that aired in the 1980s, the more I am immersed and more I'm drawn to something. Or I should say, at least I have a different experience and maybe a more rewarding one. Glow is so, I think, beginning to end to me, not only is it a great story and great actors, but beginning to end so 80s that I told John this earlier. I went to watch the pilot, and before I knew it, I was through season 1. I was like, what happened? I was supposed to watch so many other shows. I'm running out of time.
Me too.
But
I agree with you, Will. The more immersive it is, the more of a positive experience I come away with.
Yeah.
Like with Argo, could have been lifted out of 1980, and I just had this visceral experience watching it in a theater going, yes, this is what movies looked like back then. Yeah. I can't tell you why, but I know they did.
Yes. Well, now you need to know why as you make yours.
Now I need to know why. Exactly.
To your point, Will, you said it's a different experience. I think that's the thing. Is it a nostalgic experience? Like you said, Chris, I'm like, I'm in it. You could have been there. Or is it like, oh, look what they tried to do. That's cute. But you're not having the nostalgia. You're more observing how they tried. And if you don't see how they tried, then you got me. It's just it's so cohesive. That's great.
Well, the last point I'll make is just a suggestion. Okay. And I'll back it with some examples. Earlier in the news, which had I known, I would have had you guys on it. Earlier in the news, we were talking about how there was an article that came out in connection with the 40th anniversary of Fast Times, where Judge Reinhold and Amy Heckerling were talking about how the studio execs deemed the movie as pornography and they were considering not releasing it, and ultimately they released it limited and didn't put a lot of advertising behind it. Which occurs to me, you guys have got to have some gratuitous nudity in your film in order to make it feel 80s authentic.
I'll have to run that past the director.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And see what he thinks.
Yes.
We do live in different times, and gratuity is frowned down upon in a lot of ways, and justifiably so. But
all right.
But yeah,
I really hoped your answer was going to be way ahead of you, Will.
Yes.
We're still seeking funding, so once we get our $2.5 million. So.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us today and helping us shed some light on why some of the shows and movies we like set in the 1980s feel like they're set in the 1980s. And we wish you all the best of luck with your project and look forward to seeing it. And then we'll have you back on, and then we'll just, analyze that and see if you succeed. Won't you love that?
Well, you'll have to.
Can't wait. Thank you so much, Will. Thank you, John.
It's a lot of pressure, I think, to get an 80s piece appropriate for look, maybe you and I are just tough critics, like we were talking earlier. Maybe our circle we know is just, maybe the broader audience is a little more forgiving, but I think it's a high bar to be able to make something that makes us feel like it's set in our favorite decade.
Yeah, I think what I learned from Rand and Chris was that we're not the only ones for whom those sort of details not just matter consciously, but they affect how and whether you enjoy it on the level the filmmaker intended. And those things really do matter. And it's great that these guys are making a film that they do care that much, which means I'm definitely on board.
Yeah, you're right. It's so encouraging. Like I said, it's a high bar, but it's so encouraging to have two gentlemen that are making the film that care so much about those things and are aware of it.
Yeah.
Because some of those shows we watched, I feel like Americans that keep coming back to that. Did they really care? Yeah,
they're using the 80s as window dressing, not as we're not immersing it in the 80s. We're hanging some 80s drapes on it, and that's a totally different thing. And it's, as you said, it's a different way to experience and enjoy the film or the show or whatever.
Oh, Reagan's on the TV in the background.
Welcome to the 80s. We're there.
Yeah. All right. Hey, our show is brought to you every week, and thanks in part to our early adopters, Kathy Burke, Rick Parker, and Karen Flieger. We should have got Kat phone in just to do this. And in the background, you hear Duran Duran, hungry like whatever their songs go.
The Duran Duran mosh pit, I'm sure, is where Kat is right now. We're missing it.
Oh, yeah. Have her doing it while she's got that camera on her head, getting thrown around. And Kathy Burke.
Oh, early adopters. Oh, God.
And, of course, very special thanks to our Secret of My Success level Patreon supporters, John Henderson, Craig Coletta, and John Kaminsky. Hey, guys, we're going to be back with more content. More? What? I don't know. Hey, we will talk to you.
Further content. Additional.
No shit. It's like, no shit. That's what you do.
You're going to do this again?
Right.
Nice.
Sorry about that. Hey, we will talk to you again next time on 1980s Now.
Bye-bye.